Welcome to the Greater Philadelphia Jewish Film Festival in Conversation. My name is Henry Green, Professor of Jewish Studies at the University of Miami and the founding director of Sephardi Voices, a project that collects the stories of the million Jews displaced in the wake of the establishment of the State of Israel from the Arab world. I am so pleased to introduce today's panelists for the Mish-Mish discussion. Tal Michael, the director. Tal is a film and television director, a graduate of Tel Aviv University. Her focus, among other subjects, is on human rights. Her works include Who's Afraid of Mordechai Benunu and the documentary series My Little Empire. Avi Cohen, our second panelist, the writer and supervisor of the production. Avi is the creator of Hartzufim, among other productions. And Levana Zamir, our third panelist, an Egyptian witness born in Cairo. Levana and her family fled Egypt in the wake of Israel's War of Independence in 1948. She is the president of the Association of Egyptian Jews and president of the Israeli Association of Jews from Arab Countries. Levana is a leading international activist for justice and redress of Jewish refugees from Islamic lands. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for sharing this discussion. So let me begin by first complimenting Tal and Avi on shedding light on the amazing Egyptian Jewish community pre-1948 through the illustration of the untold story of the Frenkel Brothers and their pioneering efforts to develop animation cartoon production in the Arab world. For me, the film feels like a documentary, but is so much more. Using archival footage mixed with contemporary interviews, I began to appreciate that the story's recounting of a preservation project is only the tip of the iceberg. Rather, it is a story of identity, loss, and memory of a Jewish civilization in Egypt that flowered for centuries. It is the story of a dysfunctional extended family with members caught between Israel and France, each experiencing transit camps and the trauma of resettlement with no resources. And last but not least, an observation of how an Ashkenazic attitude permeates our Jewish culture and the arts and sacrifices the Sephardi. Because the film is so thematically layered, and we have limited time, I would like to focus on three themes in terms of my questions. First, what I call Disney in Egypt. The second, the preservation project. And the third is human rights. So let's begin with Disney in Egypt. We all know the story of Walt Disney. Chicago boy moves west to California in the early 1920s, shortly after the four Warner Brothers, whose parents had fled the pogroms of Poland, opened their first studio on Sunset Boulevard in 1918. The Warner Brothers were Jewish entrepreneurs, first generation born. Jack was born in Canada. I was born in Canada, so I mentioned that. Trying to make it in a new world. They migrated from Baltimore. Disney, facing stiff competition, turns his attention to animation cartoons. In 1927, the Warner Brothers had produced the first talkie in Hollywood, The Jazz Singer, with Al Jolson. Disney's answer was Mickey Mouse in 1928. The film Mish-Mish is a similar story during the same era, but situated in the Middle East, and combines the creativity of Disney with the business acumen of the Warner Brothers. The story of three Jewish guys, the Frenkel Brothers, whose parents had migrated similarly from Poland to escape the pogroms, but didn't come to America. They settled in Palestine and then moved on to Egypt in 1914 as World War I began. Two decades later, their children, the Frenkel Brothers, pioneer Egyptian cartoon animation. Similar to Disney, who faced stiff competition, the Frenkel Brothers created the character Mish-Mish, the Egyptian Mickey, in 1936. So let me begin with a question for Tal, the director. What inspired you to direct the film? And did Mickey loom on your horizon when you made the film?
I can say, first of all, I'm very happy to be here in via Zoom in the Philadelphia Jewish Festival. It's really honor for me. And the beginning of Mish-Mish was by mistake. I didn't mean to make this film at all. I didn't know the Frenkel Brothers at all, and Mish-Mish also. It started with an article that I was reading about the history of animation, and there was a footnote there that spoke about the beginning of the animation in Africa and the Arab world that began quite late. I don't know why, but I wanted to check what was the first animation piece in Arabic. I just Googled it, and there was this article of the Didier Frenkel, who said that his father and uncles were the Disney of Egypt, Disney Brothers of Egypt, and it was really weird for me because they were called the Frenkel Brothers, and it wasn't such an Egyptian name. So I saw that it's a hoax or just something that he made up. And I started to look for the Didier Frenkel and to read more about the beginning of animation in Egypt. And when Avi and I had the chance to find him in France, we realized that it's a real person and he has all the archives. And then we went to France and we saw for the first time Mish-Mish Effendi. And from that moment, yes, the idea of the Disney brothers on the Fleischer brothers also was also all the time in my mind. But I think that also in their mind, because the Frenkel brothers are inspired so much from the animation in America, and it was their vision. You can see it also in the animation in the character of Mish-Mish and his friends, and yes, they wanted to be the Disney brothers of Egypt, of the Arabic world, of Africa. Yeah. And so it just started by an accident, no more than this, like all the many films that people are made.
So let me ask Avi a question here. When you saw the Frenkel Film Collection, one of the features that stood out was their support of Egypt's World War II war efforts through the Mish-Mish character, something you document in the film. Harry Warner also supported the American war effort and was challenged in 1941 with alleged accusations of propaganda in their films. Harry, here's a quote: "You may correctly charge me with being anti-Nazi, but no one can charge me with being anti-American." So as the writer of the film, Avi, I'm asking you, what were your thoughts of their support of the Egyptian government's war effort with the Holocaust and Rommel's army knocking on the door? And why did you choose the clips that you chose?
Basically, I think what's interesting about that film, which is supporting the Egyptian, or actually it's not supporting the Egyptian government, or it's supporting the British war effort. And the reason for the British at that time ruled, they controlled Egypt. And the reason, and what I found very interesting was the reasoning behind that, because Egypt, the Egyptians were still not very sure which side they're going to take. They didn't really care. If Rommel would win, they will go with Rommel, and Rommel was very close by. So the whole film is based on the idea that the British are trying to convince Egyptian crowd, the Egyptian audience, that they are stronger and they are going to win. That was the basic point of that film, the propaganda film. Obviously, the Jewish Frenkel brothers were very keen to support that effort, and that was a very dangerous and very hairy time, also in Israel, Palestine of the time, and everybody got ready for Rommel to arrive. But basically, that film was using a very popular, a really Mickey Mouse-like figure, which was Mish-Mish, to head the British war effort by convincing the Egyptian citizens, the Egyptian civilians, to support Britain.
This says something about how popular the character was.
Yes, very much.
It had become part of the geist, the cultural way that one sort of entered the visual world of cinema, and that character could be taken anywhere, and people would know. They would recognize and be connected, which is I think a very strong comment in terms of how it was like Disney, how this character became so popular, like Mickey Mouse in a way. Tal, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, because Mish-Mish, the Frenkel brothers, their tragedy was that they were in the minute before the great
breakthrough
succession, because and that was the minute that they had to leave Egypt. They didn't have this breakthrough like the Disney brothers. People were watching them. They were watching their films that they were in the beginning of the Egyptian films, of the feature films, and again, step by step, more films, more animation, more fans. But I can't say that they were like the Disney brothers. They were so popular. They were 1 minute before, and I think this is also what made their story so tragic, because they tried to make this true, to make the great success in France after they had to immigrate, and they felt that they couldn't do it in Egypt. It was really sad, I think.
There was one thing that I wanted to, because of this comparison with Disney, they built their own camera.
Yeah.
Disney had hundreds of people to work on any of these films. They had to build, they didn't know how to build an animation camera. They invented it. They really had to reinvent every piece of equipment they used. Camera, the cells, the paint, everything was invented by them, because there was nobody to learn from. They only saw the Disney films and they copied them. But the mere research of motion in an animation film, just to create the motion by 24 frames, is a miracle for somebody to reinvent on their own. And this is part of the great achievement.
Yeah, they had only one film, one book, or how-to book. It was a Czech book that they were learning from. And the one anecdote that in the end of the film, or in the beginning, I don't remember, it's from a different film, you can see many names of people in the credits. They just invented those names because there were three, and they wanted people to think that there are many more that helped to create the films. So yeah, there were the three of them against the world, as I see it.
So let me ask Levana, who actually lived in Egypt at this time. So the question I have for Levana: did you watch the movie? Did you see this Mish-Mish character? And then even more than that, did you know that the creators were Sephardi or Ashkenazi Jews?
Such a question. Well, for us, it was Mish-Mish, of course, but for us it was Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse in Arabic. Of course, in Arabic, it was for granted for us to talk in Arabic. I spoke Arabic fluently at home with the maids. At school, we talked French, of course, because we were going to French schools. And so it was for granted for us. I didn't know, of course, I didn't know that it was created by Jews. No, it wasn't a question at all. If I am a Jew or not a Jew, my best friend at school was a Muslim. I never asked her, what are you doing as a Muslim? It was for granted for us. So we didn't know that the whole cinema industry in Egypt was created almost by Jews. You know, Togo Mizrahi was one of the founding fathers of Egyptian cinema. Laila Murad, she was my favorite actress and singer. I was 12 years old when we left, so I remember. I didn't know she is a Jew. I learned about that only much later when I came to Israel. They spoke about the Jews. The whole cinema, now we know, Tal knows, the whole cinema industry in Egypt was based on Jews from Egypt, as the banking, as the many other domains. The Jews of Egypt, the community of the Jews of Egypt, they built the economy, the finance, the banking, the industry, the culture, everything. And one day, like the Frenkels, we were kicked out, we were expelled, or we were compelled to leave. So the Frenkels family are really the story of the Jews of Egypt. We did everything for Egypt. We loved Egypt. We love Egypt until now, until today, you know, although all the suffer and everything, you know, but we love Egypt. We loved it and we continue to love Egypt. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. So what we have is a child, Levana, who watches the movies in Arabic because it's in Arabic, who says, wow, this is Mickey. She knows nothing about what's going on, but what she does is enjoys the cinema, enjoys the experience. So let me turn to the second part, which is the preservation project, which is what you did. And I want to begin in the following way. Egypt is the only Arab country where Ashkenazi and Sephardi live together. But unlike the situation of the Sephardi in Europe, where they were less established in the early 20th century, the Sephardi in Egypt were top of the pecking order of Jewish society. And the Ashkenazi who came during this era of the early 20th century were the poor Jews. In Europe, it's the opposite. Although the Ashkenazi quickly became upwardly mobile and integrated within the Jewish community. And there's just a book that was recently published, written by Deborah Starr. It came out last year, called Togo Mizrahi and the Making of Egyptian Cinema, where she recounts how he and other Jews are the founding fathers of Egyptian cinema in the 1930s. So I'd like to know, and I'm asking both Tal and Avi about this, how did the screenplay evolve? What kind of movie did you begin that you thought you were making? Was it a preservation project documentary? How did it evolve?
Avi, I think you should begin with Mish-Mish in the basement.
This is where it started when we went down to the Frenkel house in Paris, France, and found in the basement all packs of old films that nobody opened. Didier, the son of the Frenkels, led up there. But I think basically, when you're asking about evolving, the way it evolved was there was one problem with this project all the way through. There was too many subjects, too many roads to take. You had to take the animation road, which is very interesting cinematically. Then there is the historic road, which is also very interesting about Jews and whatever happened to them in Egypt, and then whatever happened to them after the war and in France. And then there was the third layer, which is, I think, to my mind, is the leading layer, which is the personal layer. It's the story of a family with a dream, with a great dream of conquering the world of cinema, and the way this dream was broken by history. And I think this is a very, very Jewish story. The story of almost getting there, of getting very high up in the ladder. And Mish-Mish was very famous. He was quite a star. And then the second half of the film is the Frenkel family trying to recreate that. And they changed his name from Mish-Mish to Mimish because they went to France, and they tried to do it all in France to make him a French hero. And that didn't work. And this tragedy is the emotional core of this project, I think. And it's all thanks to Tal. Really is. She's the one who focused it on the personal story, and I think this what makes this film really moving, because it's a very interesting family. It's the relations between the three brothers, and it's also a very, very Jewish story, because it's my parents and everybody's parents in Israel who had a life. The life was broken in the middle. The same, I think, with many Jews in America. They had a life, they had an achievement, they had a place in the world, and it was broken in the middle, and they had to redo it again. Some did succeed, some didn't, some more, some less. But this break in the middle of life is a very Jewish thing to my thinking.
Tal?
I think that when we make films, so sometimes the location is dictating how it will looks like, and what how it will be told. And the house of the Frenkels, when we went there for the first time, is it's really weird, because there is the first floor of Marcel. It's her kingdom. The upper is Didier, who lived with her and live now, and the basement. And the basement, only Didier goes there, and there is all this cans and bottles, and then candles for Shabbat, and also the celluloid, the films, and the gelatines for animation. And it's something like when he told us, it's something like forbidden to go there and to be there for with the films. And Marcel was there then, worried about what's going on there, and she wanted to get everything, all this archive out of the house because it's flammable. And there was something in the film, in the material, that we don't see it today, because everything, it's digital. You don't touch the film, you don't touch the celluloid, and the restoration is something, I think, that was born there from touching the material, for revealing all this, the animation stuff. And also we found there the film of the Jewish community in Egypt back then in the 30s, which was a real treasure, because as far as we know, there isn't any documentation in motion, except for half a minute in Bet Tfutzot or something like this. All the documentation are stills, photos. So I think that the making of going down the basement, touching the material, the films that they were dealing with their bare hands, it led us to the idea of filming the restoration and see how it affects Marcel and the rest of the family.
I must just add that Marcel is the wife of one of the three brothers, and because you mentioned her, and there's a scene in the film where Marcel meets an Egyptian who is an expert on films, and they sit down together and they're reminiscent. They have memories from Egypt, and they sing together children's song. And you can see that basically they're both Egyptians, and basically they share the same memories and the same childhood, and it's very, very touching, this scene. He came in to interview her, but he ended up singing with her, and it's very nice.
Yeah. How do you say, Levana? You can take out the person from Egypt, but you cannot take the Egypt
from the person.
Yes, yes, there is such, yes, we say, as you said, you can take the Jews from Egypt, but you cannot take Egypt from the heart of the Jews.
But how do you say it in Arabic?
We say it in English, in French more than in Arabic, but in Arabic we say something else. اللي يشرب مية النيل يرجعله. Those who drink the Nile water, they return always. And there is even a book from Jean Nagar in the United States, Sipping from the Nile. She told the whole story of the family Mosseri, bankers, very rich. They were sequestrated and expelled. So sipping from the Nile, it's you drink the water of the Nile, so you return because you are from there. I could say more than that. Bnei Israel, the people of Israel, and it's not only me saying this, professors, they say this, the people of Israel was born in Egypt. They arrived as a family, yes, Israel. The family Jacob is Israel. So they are Bnei Israel, the sons of Israel, Jacob. A family of 60 people, they were compelled to leave. They left after 300 or 400 years later, and only then they became the people of Israel, 600,000 Israeli. So Egypt is Israel. We were born, Bnei Israel, the people of Israel, was born in Egypt. So how could we take it out of us? We cannot, until today. You can't believe what I say, huh?
So let me then enter the third theme that I wanted, which is human rights.
Yeah.
And so Marcel identified initially as an Egyptian woman. We only learn later that she's a Sephardi. Her story in the film reminds me of those I interview for my project with Sephardi Voices regarding their loss of homeland and their identity. What Levana is talking about, and I'm really addressing this. She suffered from being a Jewish refugee, like the father of Lucette Lugnato, who wrote The Man in the White Sharkskin Suit, My Family's Exodus from Old Cairo to the New World.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm asking Levana here, which is personal, and I hope she doesn't mind. Did you identify with Marcel's story, her voice? Because her voice reveals just what you said. Life was so beautiful. So can you tell us a bit of your story that might help the audience understand?
Okay, look, Marcel's story says that she couldn't adapt to this new status of refugee as a woman. But as you just said, also the father of Lucette Lagnato couldn't adapt to the new situation as a refugee. He had everything in Egypt. Marcel had everything in Egypt. She never complained before. As you said in the movie, she says life in Egypt was so beautiful, even for not only for the rich, for everybody. It was a very, very beautiful life. All of a sudden, these 100,000 Jews from Egypt came to this poor status, and some of them didn't adapt. The women, they could continue to live, but with such a suffering. Yes, the men sometimes they made suicide. I remember in France when we were refugees, because when we had to leave Egypt in 1949 after being expelled, we were in France in a refugee camp, Camp d'Arenas. And all of a sudden, one day, the father of a friend of mine, 12 years old, she was like me, all the camp was there to help because he committed suicide. He couldn't continue to live when he lost his identity, not only his assets, his properties, his homeland. He even his identity was lost. So he met suicide. The men couldn't bear this conflict on them. Women could bear conflicts. Men couldn't. We know that. Now they begin to live with conflicts, but then it was too hard for them. I know that even my mother, we found her, you know, she wrote every day what happened to her, and after her death we found her diary, and she said one day she wrote she see that her husband Victor, my father, lost his mind. She said, I have to take the whole the whole authority, and she did. You see, because all of a sudden she had everything, all of a sudden she had nothing. We were expelled because in May 1948, already, the day of the creation of the State of Israel by Ben-Gurion, at noon exactly in the night, 10 officers came to our house searching everywhere. They found nothing, they left, but they took my uncle, the brother of my father, to prison. They said you are a Zionist. He wasn't, he just wasn't. But they did this, and immediately after that, persecutions began. That's why Marcel says that we couldn't live anymore in Egypt. Persecutions, murders in the streets, imprisonments. So even those who weren't expelled like us, we were expelled with my uncle. After two years in prison, he was expelled and we had to live with him. Others were compelled to live, like the Frenkels, because it was unbearable. So you can imagine 100,000 people, they don't live just like that en vacances and they don't return. Yes, you can understand something happened. They couldn't live anymore. So you see, some of us didn't adapt. They couldn't bear the situation of being refugees. Others, like my mother, she was very strong and she did everything. When they came from the Jewish agency saying you can do Aliyah now, my father didn't want. He began to work. He had one of the biggest business printing in Cairo, and it was sequestrated. But in Marseille, he couldn't begin to open a new business like he had in Cairo. So he went and worked in another small business. This is resilience. He did it. So he didn't want to go to Israel, but my mother said, and it was the first time I heard my mother telling my father no. She said, no, we are going to a country where everybody is a Jew, so nobody will tell my children, sale juif, as we heard in the streets of Marseille. I heard it. Children my age told me, sale juif, to me and to my brothers. So my mother decided for us. And later in the Ma'abara, it was more difficult. My mother was crying every night on her pillow. So Marcel is the generation of my parents. They suffered very much. Resilient or not resilient, they suffered for us. I am sure Marcel also sent her children to school. It was very important, education. It was the first, really the first thing for the Jews of Egypt, education. So me and my brother, my mother sent us to work in the morning at 16 years old and to study in the evening. You see, I was a working, I was a working girl. And that's why we succeeded to get out of our refugee status. But not the generation of our parents, not Marcel, not the Frenkels, not my father. They worked, of course they worked, but simple work. The Frenkels, they continued their dream. They wanted to continue and they didn't succeed because nobody succeeded to come back again to do the same as they did in Egypt or in Morocco or in Tunisia. If Egypt, we had only 100,000 Jews, all of them refugees. We have almost 1 million of Jews from Arab countries becoming refugees.
Let me ask you this, Levana, then,
Yeah.
which is really, Egypt is illustrative of all those 10 countries of 1 million Jews. And the Frenkels are your parents' generation.
Yeah.
But we're now 60 years later, 70 years later. And so here's the question that I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask both Tal and Avi this question, is that, do you think the preservation of the Frenkel oeuvre, of their work, and its viewing on Egyptian TV, which you show in the movie, is a positive sign that the Egyptian government is becoming more generous regarding the preservation of Jewish communal property in Egypt? Do you think that this film is in a way a healing, a way of helping in terms of this memory?
Okay, the answer is yes. President Sisi, he's honoring very much all the antiquities of Egypt, all the ancient culture of Egypt, not only Sisi. Egypt has always honored its antiquities, the Pharaoh antiquities, the Copts antiquities, and the Jewish antiquities. You see, El Sisi is not only doing this, he is also restoring our synagogues in Cairo and Alexandria. But what? He is making of them Egyptian antiquities. We cannot pray anymore in our synagogues, but it's good. I am very glad of that, because one day, perhaps in 1,000 years from now, everybody will know that the Jews were here. The synagogues are here, like the Pharaoh, like the Sphinx, like the pyramids. Egypt is perhaps one of the few countries, Arab countries, honoring its past, its Jewish past. Not like in Iraq, they destroy synagogues. That's horrible. Now El Sisi is even restoring our cemeteries. Can you believe this? Yes, there is a change more and more and more because of El Sisi. Thank you. Thank you, El Sisi.
So let me ask Tal, because one of your themes is of your movie making is human rights. So do you see the film as a shout out for loss and for human rights? Do you see your movie in that way?
I don't know. I think that you can see you can see it in most of the films, maybe, that deals with documentaries, that deals with people. But I want to start the answer from the last question, because it's connected. I think that the way that Marcel is my heroine, she's my heroine in the film, because she struggles. She struggles for the future, for the children. And the Frenkel brothers, they just the identity is of animation artists, and they stuck with this identity, which is Egyptian. They try to restart in France, but they cannot do it. And I think that the Egypt in these last 2 decades, or 1 decade, maybe Levana knows better than me for sure. So I think that they miss their artists. They miss the people who have to make their culture, the film industry, the theater, etc. And I think this is one of the reasons that the Frenkel brothers are getting back to history. It didn't start with us. It started a little bit before with Didier Frenkel, who studied the preservation of the films, and with our film, of course. And I can tell you that 1 month ago, there was a screening of Mish-Mish in Cairo. It was in the, they told us we couldn't go, but they told us that it was a very successful screening. They asked us to make more screenings like this. And I really hope that the people of Egypt will come and see Mish-Mish that was lost for so many decades. Yeah.
Avi, can you comment?
Yeah,
Please?
I think what Levana just described, it was a part of the Egyptians trying to preserve the past as an international community, especially Alexandria, which is a major Mediterranean city, still is today and always was a mixed city. And people in France, like Levana, but not only here, but every educated person spoke French and English and obviously Arabic. And the Egyptians have a great respect to their past, to the, let's say, glorious past, which was. And for them, the fact that Jews and Christians and Muslims used to live together is very important. Let me just put in one little comment here. That's true about Egypt and the Jewish history. It's not that true about Egypt and Israel, although there is peace. There is a peace between these two countries, but as Tal just said, we couldn't go over there for the screening of that film. So it's the question is still complicated.
So let me ask both Avi and Tal one last question. And that is that, was it a learning experience for you about Egyptian Sephardi Jewry?
Yeah, for sure. I lived as a child in a neighborhood from many people from Arabic countries. I remember I was speaking Moroccan's language, etc. And I didn't know until I saw, Levana told me, and other people from Egypt told me about the community, which was so modern, such a cosmopolitan community. But I didn't believe it completely till I saw the footage that we found, the video footage of young boys and girls, young people who are like, they're quite hipsters, if I can say. They dress so nicely, the girls are smoking cigars, they're dancing, and they're making the parties, and they go to the synagogue, and then to the beach, and then and it was like you're going out to the beach of Tel Aviv and you see these people today. It was amazing. it was not like my neighbors who came from Yemen, who were from other period, you can say. It was such a modern community, and then we started to read the books about it, and it was a revelation, a true revelation.
Avi?
It was a revelation about the Jews in Egypt and the relations between the Jews in Egypt. I must say that I didn't make the discrimination between Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews, as they didn't in themselves. I mean, the Frenkel brothers, I don't, although, what's her name? Grandmother?
Marcel?
Marcel mentions that when she married to the Frenkel family, they looked down upon her. She mentioned that in the film, that she was a Sephardi and they were Ashkenazi and they looked down upon her. But to me, it was a much more Jewish story than the difference between Sephardi and Ashkenazi. And also, maybe because I'm older, but when I grew up, everybody was a refugee. And as Levana said, there were suicides happening and great crises happening, but it was not, unfortunately, Ashkenazi did also commit suicide, and the Ma'abara, which is the transition camp, was combined with everybody. And it was hard times. It was hard times almost everywhere after the World War, but after the War of '48, it was even worse. So I don't see there's a big difference in the destiny of the Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jews at that time. What happened later in Israel is another story.
I can see it in their animation. I think that if they were just in another parallel world, they were Sephardi, I think the animation could have been looked different, not so American. I think so, yeah.
So let me close by thanking all of you, Tal, Avi, Levana, for sharing your thoughts, for helping us to appreciate and dig deeper into the layers of the film. And that I hope that the audience will invite their friends to watch the film and help in the preservation of other Egyptian Jewish cultural products and the arts. And hopefully when you make your next film, they'll invite you to the opening in Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much, Professor Green. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
תודה
Bye.
רבה.
תודה רבה.